The ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the soft murmur of nervous laughter. 20 perfectly arranged tables dotted the marble floor, each set for two with fresh white roses and flickering candles. Outside, Chicago's skyline glittered against the October night, but inside, hearts were racing for entirely different reasons. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Wellington adjusted his Armani tie for the third time in 5 minutes, his hands trembling slightly as he checked his Patek Philippe watch, 7:58 p.m. 2 minutes until the speed dating event would begin, and his chest was already tightening with that familiar sensation he'd been fighting for months. At table 12, a young woman in a thrift store dress smoothed down her hair, checking her reflection in the butter knife. Emma Rodriguez had scraped together $50 for this event, money that should have gone toward her mother's medical bills, but her sister had insisted. "Emma, you're 26, and you've never even been on a real date. Mom would want you to try." Neither Marcus nor Emma knew that in exactly 37 minutes, their worlds would collide in the most unexpected way possible, and that the girl everyone would dismiss as not belonging here would be the only person in a room full of successful professionals who could save a life. Marcus Wellington had everything the American dream promised and more. At 32, he was the youngest CEO in his company's 100-year history, having transformed Wellington Industries from a struggling manufacturing firm into a tech empire worth over $2 billion. His penthouse overlooked Lake Michigan, his garage housed 6 luxury cars, and his bank account had more zeros than most people could count. But tonight, standing in the opulent ballroom where Chicago's elite had gathered for an exclusive speed dating event, Marcus felt like he was suffocating. "You sure you're ready for this, buddy?" asked his best friend and business partner David Chen, straightening his own designer suit. "You've been staring at that entrance like it's going to swallow you whole." Marcus forced a smile, the same one that had graced the covers of Forbes and Business Weekly. "Just nervous about meeting someone genuine in a room full of gold diggers." It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. For the past 6 months, Marcus had been experiencing episodes that his doctor diplomatically called stress-related anxiety attacks. The pressure of running a multi-billion-dollar company, the constant media attention, and the weight of employing 30,000 people had finally caught up with him. But admitting weakness wasn't something Wellington did, especially not in public. The event coordinator, a poised woman in her 50s named Mrs. Patricia Blackwood, clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Elite Connections' most exclusive evening. Tonight, Chicago's most successful professionals will have the opportunity to meet their perfect match. Remember, you'll have exactly 4 minutes at each table before rotating. Men, you'll remain seated. Ladies, you'll move clockwise." Marcus took his assigned seat at table 1, positioned prominently near the front of the room. He wasn't surprised. His assistant had undoubtedly mentioned his net worth when making the reservation. Everything in his life was arranged according to his wealth, from the front row seats at charity galas to the VIP treatment at restaurants where he'd never waited for a table. Across the room, Emma Rodriguez was having a very different experience. "Excuse me, miss," said a stern-looking security guard, approaching Emma as she lingered near the registration table. "Can I see your ticket?" Emma fumbled in her small, worn purse, a gift from her grandmother that had seen better days. The contrast between her simple black dress from Target and the designer gown surrounding her was stark, but she held her head high. "Here it is." The guard examined the ticket with unnecessary scrutiny. "This is a $50 general admission. Are you sure you're in the right place?" "The community center event is next week." Heat flushed Emma's cheeks. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Behind her, a woman in diamonds whispered loudly enough for Emma to hear, "I can't believe they let just anyone in these days. Look at her shoes. Are those from Payless?" Emma's hand instinctively moved to smooth her dress. She'd spent hours getting ready, carefully applying the makeup tutorials she'd watched on YouTube, styling her long, dark hair with hot rollers borrowed from her neighbor. She thought she looked nice, but surrounded by women dripping in jewels and designer labels, she felt like an imposter. "Table 15, the guard said dismissively, pointing toward the back corner of the room. As Emma made her way through the crowd, she couldn't help but notice the way conversations stopped when she passed. The women sized her up with calculating eyes, while the men barely glanced in her direction. She'd known this would happen, had prepared herself for it, but the reality still stung. At table 15, she found herself seated across from a man in his late 40s who immediately looked disappointed. "Richard Sterling," he said without enthusiasm, extending a limp handshake. "Hedge fund manager. And you are?" "Emma Rodriguez. I'm a nurse at Chicago General Hospital." Richard's expression shifted from disappointment to barely concealed disdain. "A nurse? How? Noble! Tell me, what kind of return are you seeing on your investment portfolio?" Emma blinked. "My what?" "Your investments. Stocks, bonds, real estate. Surely you have some financial planning." The 4-minute timer felt like 4 hours as Emma tried to explain that her idea of financial planning was deciding whether to pay the electric bill or buy groceries first. Richard spent most of the time checking his phone and sighing dramatically. Meanwhile, at table 1, Marcus was having his own uncomfortable encounters. "So Marcus," purred Victoria Ashford, a beautiful blonde who'd introduced herself as a lifestyle influencer, "I just have to say, I absolutely loved your interview in Architectural Digest about your penthouse renovation. The infinity pool on the terrace is just divine." Marcus nodded politely, but his chest was beginning to feel tight again. Victoria continued talking about his house as if she'd lived there herself, clearly having researched every detail of his life before the event. "I've always believed that a man's home reflects his soul," she continued, leaning forward to give him a better view of her designer dress's plunging neckline. "And your soul is clearly magnificent. I'd love to see it in person sometime." The timer chimed, and Victoria moved on with a promise to, quote, "continue their conversation later." She was immediately replaced by Samantha Pierce, a corporate lawyer who spent the entire 4 minutes explaining how their combined net worth would make them a power couple for the ages. After her came Madison Wells, who worked in luxury brand consulting and had strong opinions about which European vacation homes would be best for entertaining. Then Jessica Montgomery, who managed her family's investment firm and spoke in detailed terms about prenuptial agreements and asset protection. With each rotation, Marcus felt the walls of the ballroom closing in. Every woman knew his net worth down to the last million. They'd memorized his LinkedIn profile, his magazine features, his company's quarterly reports, but none of them asked about his favorite book, his childhood memories, or what made him laugh. By the time the 5th woman sat down, Marcus was struggling to breathe normally. His shirt collar felt impossibly tight, and a thin sheen of sweat had formed on his forehead, despite the ballroom's perfect climate control. "Are you feeling all right?" asked Natalie Brooks, a pediatric surgeon who'd noticed his discomfort. "You look a little pale." "I'm fine," Marcus said quickly, forcing another smile. "Just warm in here." But he wasn't fine. The familiar symptoms were building: the racing heart, the shallow breathing, the sensation that the room was spinning slightly. He'd been managing these episodes with breathing techniques and medication, but tonight felt different. The pressure, the scrutiny, the endless parade of women who saw dollar signs instead of a person. It was all too much. As Natalie moved on to table 2, Marcus glanced around the room desperately. He needed air, needed space, needed to escape before anyone noticed something was wrong. The last thing he could afford was a public breakdown at a high-profile event where half the attendees had cameras in their purses and connections to gossip columnists. But the evening was far from over, and at table 15, Emma Rodriguez was finishing another awkward conversation with a man who'd spent 4 minutes explaining why nurses were fine for charity work, but not serious relationship material. Neither Marcus nor Emma realized that in just a few more rotations, their paths would cross in a way that would change everything. And that the girl everyone had dismissed as not belonging would become the most important person in the room. The soft chime of Mrs. Blackwood's timer had become the soundtrack of the evening, punctuating conversations every 4 minutes with mechanical precision. As the women moved clockwise around the room, a subtle hierarchy emerged. The tables closest to the front attracted the most attention, while those in the back seemed almost forgotten. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma had made it through 7 conversations, each one more deflating than the last. At table 8, she'd met Thomas Whitfield, a real estate mogul who'd asked her what neighborhood she lived in, then visibly recoiled when she mentioned the South Side. "Oh," he'd said, as if she'd announced she lived in a dumpster. "That's interesting." At table 9, she'd encountered Brandon Murphy, a tech entrepreneur who'd spent the entire time explaining why service jobs were being eliminated by automation. No offense, he'd added with a condescending smile, but nursing will probably be done by robots in 10 years. You should really think about upskilling. Emma had bit her tongue, choosing not to mention her bachelor's degree in nursing, her specialty certification in emergency medicine, or the fact that she'd literally saved 3 lives in the past week alone. Instead, she'd smiled politely and endured his lecture about future-proofing your career. Now, approaching table 10, she noticed something different. The man seated there wasn't checking his phone or looking past her toward more promising prospects. Instead, he was staring down at his hands, his breathing noticeably labored. "Hi," Emma said softly, taking her seat across from him. "I'm Emma Rodriguez." The man looked up and she was struck by his eyes. Intelligent, kind, but carrying a weight that had nothing to do with arrogance. Unlike the other men she'd met tonight, he didn't immediately size her up or dismiss her presence. "James," he said, his voice slightly strained. "James, Wellington." Emma tilted her head, studying his face with the clinical eye she'd developed through years of nursing. Pale complexion, slight tremor in his hands, elevated respiratory rate. She'd seen these symptoms countless times in the emergency room. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked, leaning forward slightly. "You look like you might be having trouble breathing." Marcus, who had given her his middle name without thinking, was surprised by the genuine concern in her voice. For the past hour, every woman had been performing, putting on a show designed to impress and attract. This woman was simply present. "I'm fine," he said automatically, then caught himself. Something about her manner, professional but not cold, caring but not invasive, made him reconsider. "Actually, I've been better. It's just a lot of people in here." Emma nodded understandingly. Crowds can be overwhelming. The acoustics in here aren't helping either. All that marble and glass bouncing sound around. "Are you feeling lightheaded at all? Any chest tightness?" Marcus stared at her in amazement. In 32 years, no one had ever asked him about his physical well-being in such a matter-of-fact way. His wealth usually meant people either fawned over him or tried to impress him, but never simply checked if he was okay. "A little," he admitted. Are you a doctor?" "Nurse," Emma said with a small smile. "Emergency department at Chicago General. You learn to read symptoms pretty quickly in that job." "Is this feeling familiar to you? Have you experienced anything like this before?" Before Marcus could answer, the timer chimed, and Emma stood to move to the next table. But instead of the usual relief he'd felt when each conversation ended, Marcus found himself disappointed. "Wait," he said quickly. "I thank you for asking. No one ever really asks." Emma paused, studying his face again. There was something about this man that seemed different from the others. Despite his expensive suit and obvious wealth, his watch alone probably cost more than her annual salary. He seemed almost lonely. "Take deep breaths," she said quietly. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. And if you start feeling worse, don't try to tough it out. Sometimes our bodies are smarter than our pride." As Emma moved to table 11, Marcus watched her go with a strange mix of gratitude and confusion. Who was this woman who'd treated him like a person instead of a bank account? At table 11, Emma encountered Dr. Harrison Blake, a prominent plastic surgeon who'd apparently been briefed on everyone's background in advance. "So Emma Rodriguez," he said with a predatory smile, "Chicago General Hospital, tell me, what's your student loan debt situation? Because I have to say, the financial disparity between us might be challenging." Emma felt her jaw clench. "I'm sorry?" "Well, let's be realistic. I pull in about $2 million a year. You're probably making, what, 60,000? 70 if you work overtime? I'm not saying it couldn't work, but we'd need to discuss expectations. I'd handle all major expenses, obviously, but you'd need to understand your place in the relationship dynamic." "My place?" Emma's voice was dangerously quiet. "Don't get me wrong, nurses are wonderful. Very nurturing, very service-oriented. Perfect qualities for a woman. But I'd need assurance that you wouldn't expect to maintain your current lifestyle once we got serious. My social circle has certain standards." Emma stood up before the timer chimed. "Where are you going?" Dr. Blake called after her. "I wasn't finished explaining the arrangement." But Emma was already walking away, her cheeks burning with humiliation and anger. She'd known this event would be challenging, but the casual cruelty was worse than she'd anticipated. These men didn't just see her as beneath them, they saw her as a commodity to be evaluated and found wanting. Meanwhile, at table 1, Marcus was struggling through another performance. Catherine Price, a venture capitalist, was explaining her investment strategy for finding a husband. "I've done my research, obviously," she said, consulting notes on her phone. "Wellington Industries stock is up 18% this quarter, and your expansion into renewable energy shows impressive forward thinking. I think we could build something really substantial together." Marcus felt his chest tightening again. "Build something?" "Partnership-wise, I mean. I bring connections in the financial sector, you bring manufacturing expertise. Plus, my family has ties to several politicians who could be useful for regulatory issues. It's really a perfect merger opportunity." She was talking about their potential relationship like a business deal, complete with projected returns and strategic advantages. Marcus tried to focus on her words, but the room was starting to feel impossibly small again. "Are you listening?" Catherine asked sharply. "I'm outlining significant mutual benefits here." Yes, sorry, just thinking about what you said." "Good. Because I don't waste time on men who can't see the big picture. Life is about maximizing opportunities, and frankly, you're probably the best opportunity in this room tonight." As Catherine continued her pitch, Marcus found his thoughts drifting back to the woman from table 10, Emma, she'd said her name was. She'd looked at him and seen a person who might need help, not a balance sheet that needed optimization. The timer chimed again, and Catherine moved on with a confident smile and a business card pressed into his palm. "Call me," she said. "I think we can do great things together." But Marcus wasn't thinking about Catherine's proposal. He was thinking about genuine concern in a stranger's eyes, and wondering if he'd ever feel that again. The night was only half over, but already he felt like he was drowning in a sea of calculated charm and strategic interest. Across the room, Emma was steeling herself for the remaining tables, unaware that the man she'd briefly tried to help was now counting the minutes until he might see her again. Neither of them realized that the real test of the evening was still to come. The evening was nearing its end when disaster struck. Marcus had endured 3 more conversations with women who treated him like a walking investment opportunity. His breathing had become increasingly shallow, his vision starting to blur around the edges. The familiar crushing sensation in his chest was building to a crescendo he couldn't control. The last woman to sit across from him had been Penelope Hartwell, an art gallery owner who'd spent the entire time discussing how his wealth could elevate her standing in the cultural community. She'd outlined elaborate plans for charity galas they could host together, each one designed to showcase their combined influence. "Of course, we'd need to be strategic about which causes to support," Penelope had explained, completely oblivious to Marcus's deteriorating condition. "Nothing too controversial, but visible enough to get us featured in the society pages. Image management is everything in our circles." Marcus had nodded mechanically, but her words felt like they were coming from underwater. His hands were trembling so badly he'd clasped them together under the table to hide the shaking. Sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead despite the ballroom's carefully controlled temperature. Emma had finally reached table 19, just 2 tables away from completing her circuit. She'd been paired with Gregory Ashton, a hedge fund manager who'd spent 4 minutes explaining why poor people were poor by choice. The conversation had started badly and gotten progressively worse. "It's really about mindset," Gregory was saying dismissively, gesturing with his crystal tumbler of top-shelf whiskey. "Wealthy people understand delayed gratification and strategic thinking. If someone's still working a basic job in their 20s, it shows a fundamental lack of ambition and intelligence. Take nurses, for example. Sure, it's necessary work, but anyone truly driven would have leveraged that into hospital administration or opened their own practice by now." Emma's jaw clenched, but she'd learned to pick her battles. Healthcare is about service, not profit margins. "See, that's exactly the poverty mindset I'm talking about," Gregory continued condescendingly. "You're thinking of small-scale, person-to-person impact instead of systemic change. Real leaders think about the bigger picture." Emma was barely listening anymore. Her attention had been drawn to the front of the room, where she could see the man from table 10. "James," he'd said, gripping the edge of his table with white knuckles. Even from this distance, she could see he was in distress. His breathing appeared rapid and shallow, and he was leaning forward in a way that suggested he was fighting nausea. "Excuse me," she said, cutting off Gregory mid-sentence as he launched into a lecture about maximizing human capital. "I wasn't finished explaining the correlation between socioeconomic status and personal character," Gregory protested, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. This is exactly the kind of lack of focus that keeps people in service positions. But Emma was already standing, her nursing instincts overriding social convention and Gregory's wounded ego. Something was seriously wrong with James, and the elegant crowd around him seemed oblivious to his crisis. The woman currently seated at his table was still talking animatedly, apparently unaware that her companion was having a medical emergency. Marcus felt like he was drowning in plain sight. His heart was racing so fast he thought it might explode, each beat echoing in his ears like a war drum. The chandeliers above seemed to be spinning in slow motion, casting fractured light that made his head pound. The conversations around him had become a meaningless roar of voices, blending together into white noise. He tried to stand, thinking fresh air might help, but his legs were shaking too badly to support him. The woman across from him, Miranda something, he'd already forgotten her last name, was still discussing investment opportunities, completely unaware that he was spiraling into crisis. "So as I was saying, the art market is really heating up right now, and with your connections, we could corner several emerging artists." "Help?" he whispered, but the word was lost in the ambient noise of the ballroom and Miranda's enthusiastic pitch. The room felt like it was closing in on him. The walls seemed to be moving, breathing almost, and the elegant crowd of Chicago's elite looked like predators circling their prey. Every face that turned toward him seemed to be calculating his worth, weighing his vulnerability as either weakness to exploit or damaged goods to avoid. That's when Emma appeared at his side like an angel of mercy, cutting through the crowd with purpose and determination. "James, hey, look at me," she said firmly, dropping to one knee beside his chair without regard for her dress or the expensive carpet. Her voice cut through the chaos in his mind with startling clarity. "You're having a panic attack. I need you to focus on my voice." Miranda looked startled and slightly offended. "Excuse me, we're in the middle of a conversation here. Who are you?" "I'm a nurse, and this man needs medical attention," Emma said without taking her eyes off Marcus. "Please give us some space." I can't breathe," Marcus gasped, his expensive shirt now soaked with sweat despite the ballroom's perfect climate control. His chest felt like someone was sitting on it, crushing the air from his lungs. "Yes, you can. You're breathing right now, but we need to slow it down." Emma placed one hand on his shoulder, steady and reassuring, while her other hand checked his pulse at his wrist. Rapid but strong. "I want you to breathe in for 4 counts. In through your nose. 1, 2, 3, 4. Marcus tried to follow her instructions, but his body felt completely out of control. The rational part of his mind knew this was a panic attack. He'd had them before, but knowing that didn't make the terror any less real. "Good, now hold it for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now out through your mouth for 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Around them, the speed dating event continued, but several people had begun to notice the commotion. The carefully orchestrated evening was developing its first crack in the polished facade. Whispers started to spread through the crowd like wildfire. "Is that Marcus Wellington? Oh my God, is he having some kind of breakdown? Someone should call an ambulance. This is so embarrassing. Poor man. Do you think it's drugs, heart attack? I heard he's been under tremendous stress lately with the company merger." Cell phones began to emerge from designer purses as the gossip mill started churning. Emma could see people angling for photos and videos, sensing a story that would be worth something to the right tabloid or social media account. Emma heard the whispers and saw Marcus's panic intensify as he realized he was becoming a spectacle. His breathing, which had just started to stabilize, became erratic again as the full horror of his public vulnerability hit him. "They're all watching," he managed to gasp. "This will be everywhere by morning." Without hesitation, Emma made a decision that would change both their lives. "We're going to get you somewhere quiet," she said firmly, standing and positioning herself between Marcus and the growing crowd of onlookers. "Can you walk if I help you?" Marcus nodded weakly, and Emma helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as they moved toward a side exit. Her small frame was surprisingly strong, and she guided him with the confidence of someone who'd helped countless patients in crisis. The crowd parted around them, some people pulling out their phones to record the scene while others whispered among themselves about what this might mean for Wellington Industries stock prices. Mrs. Blackwood tried to restore order, clapping her hands and directing people back to their tables, but the damage to the evening's elegant atmosphere was already done. "Don't look at them," Emma instructed as they walked. "Just focus on walking. Left foot, right foot. We're almost there." She guided him through a service door into a quiet corridor lined with catering equipment and stacks of extra chairs. The sudden silence was like a balm to Marcus's frayed nerves. The marble floors gave way to practical linoleum, and the crystal chandeliers were replaced by simple fluorescent lighting. It was the first genuine relief he'd felt all evening. "Sit down here," Emma said, helping him onto a stack of chair cushions someone had left against the wall. "Much better. No crowds, no noise, no pressure." The contrast was immediate and profound. In the ballroom, every breath had felt monitored, every movement calculated for its social impact. Here in this forgotten corridor, Marcus could finally exhale without wondering who was watching and what they might think. Emma knelt beside him again, this time checking his pulse more thoroughly while continuing the breathing exercises. "Your heart rate's coming down. That's good. Your body is just responding to stress. It feels dangerous, but you're not in any real physical danger. This will pass." She spoke with the calm authority of someone who'd talked countless people through medical crises. Her voice had a soothing quality that cut through his anxiety, like a warm knife through butter. Marcus found himself focusing on her words instead of the panic still churning in his system. "How often do you get these attacks?" Emma asked, her tone professional but kind. "More frequently lately," Marcus admitted, surprised at his own honesty. "Usually I can manage them with breathing techniques, but tonight was different. All those people, all those expectations. High-stress environments can definitely trigger them. The human nervous system wasn't designed to handle the kind of social pressure you were under there." Emma studied his face with clinical precision. "Are you taking anything for anxiety?" "My doctor prescribed something, but I rarely take it. I don't like feeling dependent on medication." Emma nodded understandingly. "A lot of people feel that way. But there's no shame in using tools that help you function. You wouldn't refuse insulin if you were diabetic, right?" Gradually, Marcus's breathing began to normalize completely. The crushing weight on his chest started to lift like a heavy blanket being removed, and the spinning sensation slowed to a stop. Color began to return to his face as his circulation improved. "How did you know exactly what to do?" he asked when he could finally speak normally, his voice still slightly hoarse from the panic. "Emergency department, remember? We see panic attacks pretty regularly, usually people having the worst day of their lives." Emma's expression softened with empathy. "Car accident victims, people who've just lost loved ones, patients getting devastating diagnoses. Panic is the body's way of responding to overwhelming situations." She paused, studying his face with genuine concern rather than the calculating looks he'd been receiving all evening. "How long have you been dealing with these?" Marcus hesitated. He'd never admitted his condition to anyone except his doctor and his most trusted assistant. The shame of weakness, especially for someone in his position, felt almost unbearable. But something about Emma's matter-of-fact approach made honesty feel possible. "About 6 months. They started when—" He paused, then decided honesty couldn't make things worse than they already were. "When the pressure of running my company became too much. We're going through a major expansion, the board is breathing down my neck, and every decision affects thousands of jobs. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and can't breathe just thinking about it all." "Your company?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Wellington Industries. I'm Marcus Wellington." Emma's eyes widened slightly as the pieces clicked into place. She'd heard the name, of course. Everyone in Chicago had. Wellington Industries was one of the city's biggest employers, and Marcus Wellington was regularly featured in business magazines and society pages. But looking at this vulnerable man sitting on cushions in a service corridor, she saw only someone who'd needed help. "Why did you tell me your name was James?" she asked, though her tone held no judgment. Marcus looked down at his hands, still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. "Because for 4 minutes I wanted to be seen as just a person. Not a net worth or a business opportunity or a strategic alliance. You asked if I was okay like you actually cared about the answer, not like you were evaluating my potential usefulness. I did care. I do care." Emma sat down beside him on the cushions, not caring that her dress would probably be wrinkled. Money doesn't make you immune to panic attacks. If anything, the pressure probably makes them worse. Wealth comes with its own set of stressors that most people don't understand. Everyone out there, Marcus gestured toward the ballroom, where they could still hear the muffled sounds of conversation and clinking glasses. They see dollar signs when they look at me. Investment opportunities, social climbing, strategic partnerships. But you saw someone who needed help. That's what I do. It's who I am. Emma's voice was simple and honest. In the emergency room, it doesn't matter if someone's a CEO or a janitor. When they're in crisis, they're just a human being who needs care. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the contrast with the calculating atmosphere of the ballroom striking. Here, in this unglamorous corridor, both of them could finally drop their guards and be authentic. I should probably go, Emma said finally, though she made no move to leave. People will be wondering where I went, though honestly, I doubt anyone even noticed I was gone. I noticed, Marcus said quietly, and I'm grateful you were there. Wait, Marcus caught her hand gently, his touch hesitant but sincere. I know this sounds crazy, given how we met, but would you like to have dinner sometime? Real dinner, not some calculated business transaction disguised as romance. Emma looked at their joined hands, surprised by how natural it felt. I'd like that. But I should warn you, I can't afford the places you're probably used to. My idea of a fancy dinner is when the restaurant has cloth napkins instead of paper ones. Good, Marcus said, returning her smile with the first genuine expression of joy he'd felt all evening. I know a great little diner on the south side. Nothing fancy, just good food and honest conversation. No wine lists that cost more than most people make in a month, no waiters who hover hoping for celebrity selfies. Just regular people eating regular food. You want to come to my neighborhood? Emma's surprise was evident. Most of the people I met tonight acted like the South Side was some kind of dangerous foreign country. I want to get to know the woman who saved my life tonight, Marcus said with quiet intensity. Everything else is just geography and social constructs that don't matter when you're sitting on cushions in a service corridor having the most real conversation you've had in months. As they exchanged phone numbers, Emma using her practical smartphone while Marcus pulled out the latest iPhone model, neither of them noticed Mrs. Blackwood peering through the service door with a knowing smile. In 30 years of running Elite Connections, she'd learned that the best matches often happened when people stopped trying to impress each other and started being human. She'd seen countless couples form through her events, but something about this pair felt different. More genuine, more meaningful. The evening was winding down in the ballroom. The final timer had chimed. Scorecards were being collected, and people were beginning to mingle during the cocktail hour that followed the formal speed dating rounds. But Marcus and Emma remained in their quiet refuge, reluctant to return to the world of performance and pretense. I should warn you about something, Marcus said as they prepared to leave their sanctuary. When this gets out, and it will get out, the media attention might be intense. Dating a billionaire comes with paparazzi and tabloid stories and social media speculation. I understand if that's not something you want to deal with. Emma considered this seriously. She'd seen enough celebrity gossip to know what he meant, and the thought of that kind of scrutiny was daunting. But looking at this man who'd been vulnerable enough to let her help him, who'd been honest about his struggles, who wanted to take her to a diner in her own neighborhood, she realized the risk felt worth taking. I've dealt with knife wounds and cardiac arrests, she said with a small smile. I think I can handle some photographers and gossip columnists. When they finally emerged from the corridor, the speed dating event had transformed into a more casual networking session. People were clustered in small groups, business cards were being exchanged, and the earlier drama of Marcus's panic attack had been absorbed into the evening's general social chatter. Several people approached them immediately, their expressions a mixture of concern and curiosity. Victoria Ashford, the lifestyle influencer from earlier, swooped in with predatory efficiency. Marcus, darling, are you feeling better? She cooed, completely ignoring Emma's presence. I was so worried about you. Perhaps you'd like to get some fresh air? I know a lovely rooftop bar nearby where we could continue our conversation from earlier. Actually, Marcus said, his voice steady and clear, I'm exactly where I need to be. Emma, would you like to get out of here? I know a diner that makes incredible pie. Victoria's perfectly made-up face showed a flash of confusion and irritation as she finally acknowledged Emma's existence. Oh, I see. Well, I suppose everyone has their charitable impulses. Emma bristled at the condescension, but Marcus stepped closer to her, a gesture of solidarity that wasn't lost on anyone watching. Emma isn't a charity, he said firmly. She's the most genuine person I've met in years, and I'm lucky she's willing to give me a chance. As they walked toward the exit together, leaving behind the whispers and calculating stares of Chicago's elite, neither of them looked back. They had found something more valuable than all the strategic partnerships and social climbing opportunities in that ballroom combined. They had found each other. 3 months later, Marcus would propose to Emma at that same diner on the South Side, far from the cameras and calculations of high society. The ring would be elegant, but not ostentatious, chosen for its meaning rather than its ability to impress others. He'd learned that the richest life wasn't measured in bank accounts or stock portfolios, but in finding someone who would sit with you on a pile of cushions and help you breathe when the world became too much. Emma had discovered that sometimes the person who needs saving isn't the one you'd expect, and that true wealth lies in having someone who sees your heart instead of your wallet, who values your character over your credit score. The speed dating event had promised to help Chicago's elite find their perfect match. For Marcus and Emma, it had delivered something even more valuable. Proof that love doesn't follow a business plan, and the most important connections happen when we're brave enough to be vulnerable with each other. Outside the Grand Meridian Hotel, they walked hand in hand toward Emma's car, a practical Honda Civic that had seen better days but had never let her down. As Marcus opened the passenger door, he realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd been in a car that wasn't driven by a chauffeur or worth more than most people's houses. "Ready for the real world?" Emma asked as she started the engine. "With you?" Marcus smiled, feeling lighter than he had in months. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." As they drove toward the South Side, leaving the glittering towers of downtown behind them, both knew their lives had changed forever. The evening had started as a search for connection among Chicago's elite, but it had ended with something far more precious. Two people who had found authenticity in a world built on pretense, and love in the most unexpected place of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.